For my interview, I decided to choose my grandfather to talk to because he has a lot of experiences and a lot of insight on what's gone on in this world and what it has and like, what can really compare and contrast to what used to also go back then. We talked about his early life coming up as a child. We also we chances from there to him graduating college and joining the army, and then from there joining the workforce. We even talked about him raising my mother and uncle during the civil rights movement, and it was just a lot of important and really eye-opening conversation. The thing that really stuck out to me the most was one of the things that really stuck in my head from the jump was when we talked about as we were talking about he was a child. He mentioned to me that he didn't even know that he was a black person per se, and he told me to explain to me this like this concept was not really in my head at all because he grew up in a white community, and so it really spoke to me that he had to learn from his family member what being a black person was and what that entails because his parents, his father and mother, did not want him to know about all the struggles that comes with it. They worked very hard and learned a lot just so they could make sure he did not have to put up with those same differences or learn or have to deal with those same disadvantages that they had to deal with because they realized a lot was maybe like a lot really hadn't changed at that time. Civil rights thing was not a thing. Segregation was still a thing. The slaves might be free. The slaves might have been freed, but we as people still were not free. And but he really did not have to worry about these too much because of where he lived, and he lived in a light community, but he was also going to segregated schools. Now he didn't have to deal with this stuff really until he got out of college and went into the army. In the army, he was treated really as, brothers. Because as soldiers, you have to stick together and fight together, or else there's nothing you could do. But he also worked in factories over there, uh, really getting a lot of good experience for when he came back home. And when he came back home was in the time was during integration, basically. So segregation was on its way out. Black people and other ethnicities were on their way into the working force, where they and the white people were basically having to accept what was happening. Our country was becoming more inclusive, but at that time, even though our country was trying to be more inclusive, their hearts really weren't in it. So sometimes it would even get so rough that in the factory was they basically like drew lines in the factory separating the workers, black workers on this side, white workers on that side. And if you stepped over those lines, that was it. Your side basically wanted nothing to do with you at all. You're basically an outcast. You might as well just go over there. You're like basically a social leper. And it was really that bad back in those days, to the point where finally, as the civil rights movement came along, it was something that was really like a huge deal, and something that really needed to happen. You could really help me feel it. This needed to happen, because people were still going crazy in the heart. You still see black people getting lynched every day in the news. Every day, I say not every day in the news. Every day in a letter in a newspaper. If you lived in black areas and you got that newspaper, in white areas they didn't really get those newspapers. They did not see the problems that we went through. The problems that a lot of people that were ill-intentioned on their side put us through. So it was just a really, when civil rights came around, it was a really important time. And when my uncle and mother was born, my grandfather, unfortunately, he had to step away from that and make sure he removed himself from that area, because if anything happened to him, they would be without a father, and he could not let that happen. So he kept his head straight and kept supporting the cause, but he had to do it out of line of sight. And it was just a really eye-opening experience, and talking to him about all these things, because no matter how long he's lived, power still corrupts the best of us, and me and my grandfather both really wish it wasn't the case.